One of the deadliest road accidents in British history occurred on the evening of December the 4th, 1951, when a double-decker bus belonging to the Chatham Bus Company accidentally ploughed into a company of young Sea Cadets who were on their way to watch a boxing match at the nearby Royal Naval Barracks. It was a terrible, tragic event which shocked the nation, and, as with so many incidents like this, it could have been so easily prevented. At around 5:45 p.m. on the evening of the 4th of December 1951, a company of 52 Royal Marine Volunteer Cadets, all aged between 9 and 13 years of age, were getting ready to set off from the Melville Barracks in Chatham, heading down to the nearby Royal Naval Barracks where they'd been invited to watch a boxing tournament. Even the damp, foggy darkness of a typical British December evening wouldn't have subdued the excitement of the young cadets, as they lined up to form a column 3 abreast. The boys were being supervised by some older NCO cadets, but the only adult present for this short trip was Lieutenant Clarence Carter, who was a regular officer in the Royal Marines. Wearing their traditional dark blue uniforms with white belts, the column of cadets, supervised by Lieutenant Carter, set off on the short march which would take them down Dock Road to the Royal Naval Barracks. Unbeknownst to them, as they set off full of excitement, this short regular march was one from which many of them would not be returning. Marching 3 abreast, Lieutenant Carter had decided to march the boys in the road, as the pavement would be too narrow. He also elected to march the column on the left-hand side of the road, that is to say, with their backs to any oncoming traffic. The marching column were not carrying any form of lighting. They had no flashlights or lanterns which would alert motorists to their presence, but Carter was not unduly worried. They would be marching along roads with street lighting, and any passing traffic would surely see a marching column of 52 young cadets. At around 6 p.m, the column was heading down Dock Road, in the area opposite the municipal swimming pool, and it was here that they had to pass through a much darker zone as fate would have it, the bulb in this street light had burned out. Now it was just at this point that Chatham traction bus GKE69 crested the rise at the northern end of Dock Road and began its drive down the hill towards the bus depot. The bus was being driven by 57-year-old John Sampson, an experienced driver with over 25 years driving experience on the buses, and he was familiar with this route, having driven it hundreds of times before. Indeed, he was due to attend a company dinner the following evening, where he would receive an honour for his long service and clean driving record. With him on the bus was conductress Dorothy Dunster, and she was standing behind Sampson's cab in the main part of the lower seating deck. Further down Dock Road, Lieutenant Carter heard the approach of a vehicle, and in the gathering gloom, he called to the cadets to move over closer to the curbside to give the oncoming bus plenty of room to pass them by. To his astonishment and horror, the bus just kept on coming, making no effort to swerve or give any room to the column of young cadets. Travelling at an estimated speed of between 30 to 40 miles per hour, the bus drove straight into the rear of the column and kept on going. The bus ploughed straight through the boys without stopping, only braking and coming to a stop about 25 yards further on. Dorothy Dunster said she thought that they'd driven over a pile of loose rocks or some stones in the road. When she got out and ran around to the front of the bus, the driver, John Sampson, was standing in the road, ashen-faced and just saying over and over, "I didn't see them, I didn't see them." When the screaming started, he cried out, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Lieutenant Carter had been struck and knocked down, but he managed to pick himself up. Looking around, dazed and stunned, he was almost unable to grasp the scene around him. The column had been decimated. There were dead and injured cadets lying all along the road. A naval petty officer who was close by at the time described the scene. "It was dark, and suddenly I heard screams. It made me go cold because it was the high-pitched screams of children. I saw a bus stop, and 3 of us ran blindly up the road. We saw the boys. They were spread out from one side of the road to the other. I picked up a boy, and he cried out, 'Oh, Mom! Oh, Mom!' I put him on the side and went to 2 others. I cradled them, but they died right there in my arms. The harrowing nature of the accident was compounded by the fact that several badly wounded children were still trapped under the bus, which was too heavy to lift. One by one, their cries faded before rescuers could get them out. Of the 52 cadets in the column, 17 had been killed outright as the bus drove through them. 7 more cadets would die later that night, bringing the total number killed to 24, with a further 18 wounded, many of them seriously. It was at the time Britain's deadliest road accident, and the shock of such a tragedy was palpable. The oldest victims were only 13, and the youngest ones just 9 years old. As the news of the tragedy broke, public support for the bereaved families was widespread and immediate, with many members of the public donating to a fund set up by the Mayor of Chatham to help the bereaved families and the injured children. They raised over £9,000, which in today's money equates to around £300,000 or about $350,000. The funerals were held a week later, thousands of mourners attending the services. Royal Marines acted as pallbearers for the boys, and many high-ranking naval dignitaries attended the funerals. 20 of the victims were buried together in the Woodlands Cemetery, Gillingham, the little coffins laid out side by side in 2 rows of 10 as they were laid to rest. In the subsequent inquiry, there were some discrepancies in testimony, mainly about the speed at which the bus was travelling. Lieutenant Carter estimated the bus was going about 40 to 45 miles per hour, but the driver Sampson insisted his speed should have only been around 20 miles per hour. Carter stated that the night had been clear, although many other witnesses had reported fog. Even though visibility was poor, Carter had been marching the cadets in the road with no rear warning lantern, and Sampson had been driving the bus with only his side lights on. The county coroner ruled that the deaths were accidental, as neither man could be shown to have been criminally negligent. However, despite the coroner's findings, the driver John Sampson was charged with dangerous driving and went to trial at the Old Bailey. During the trial, it became clear that there were 3 main factors which had contributed to the deaths of the cadets. Firstly, Lieutenant Carter was marching the column in the road with no warning lanterns. Secondly, John Sampson was driving with no headlights on, even though darkness had fallen. Now, apparently this was quite a common practice at the time. And thirdly, that the troop had just happened to be passing a defective street light and were in a particularly dark area of the road. If any one of these failings had been addressed, in all likelihood the tragedy would never have occurred. The jury found Sampson guilty, but they also asked the judge to be lenient in his sentencing, as it was obvious that other factors had played a part in the tragedy. John Sampson was fined £20 and banned from driving for 3 years. He brought his life savings to court with him, and he paid the fine on the spot. Now, it's easy to feel outraged at the light sentence and feel that Sampson had somehow gotten away with it. But while reading the sources for making this video, it seemed clear to me that this was a man who was utterly devastated by what he'd done. He gave testimony and appeared at all inquest proceedings, even if he wasn't required to do so. He was also present during the identification of the bodies, standing alone at the back of the room, twisting his cap in his hands. After the last body had been identified and the last parents had left, he reportedly collapsed in shock and had to be carried out. The judge stated that the mental punishment which Sampson was now living with would far exceed anything applied by law. And if one small action is any proof that many saw him as just another victim in this whole tragedy, it's the fact that 6 of the wounded boys, while still in hospital, chipped in to buy Sampson a parcel of fruit and chocolate and sent it to him to try to cheer him up. Sampson himself carried on living in the local area, but he was a broken man. Up until his death, he kept himself to himself, and he never spoke publicly about the tragedy. The bus involved in the accident, GKE 69, was finally scrapped in 1953, and many of the drivers were glad to see the back of it, as they did not like seeing it around or driving it after the accident. Every year following the tragedy, on the closest Sunday to the 4th of December, a remembrance service was held at the cemetery, attended by families and survivors of the tragedy. Although over the years, the members attending these have steadily fallen. On the 50th anniversary of the tragedy, a plaque on Dock Road was unveiled by the Duke of Edinburgh, and on the 70th anniversary, a memorial service was held in Woodlands Cemetery to remember the young cadets. The loss of so many young, unfulfilled lives still poignant to many people, even after the passage of so much time.